So I am making myself do this, and as you can see, unlike the Australia trip, there is no excitement in my reporting on this one, but I just have to, for the sake of fairness, because again, I do report royal news in some form or another, although I prefer to focus on my favorites, Harry and Meghan, but I have to report royal news, so yeah, let me just do it. So the king and the queen consort arrived at Joint Base Andrews in the late afternoon, and they were greeted by US Protocol Chief Monica Crowley. They changed and then went to the White House for tea. And they went to the White House for tea with number 47 and his wife. And the king kissed number 47's wife on the cheek. And, number 47 and his wife, they appeared pleased to see the king and queen. And the queen consort, she wore a pale pink Dior coat for the arrival and carried a Cartier brooch from the royal collection featuring the Union Jack alongside the American flag, a piece given to the late queen in 1957. So yeah, they've arrived, they've visited, they've had tea, they've gone to look at bees. I think somebody put it best. Somebody said they were trying to report on the visit and they gave up mid-sentence. Such is the excitement that even the reporters are still talking about Harry and Meghan. Will the king visit them? Won't he visit them? Despite the fact that both sides have said that they will not be seeing each other. But we do know that the institutional machinery is working very hard to frame this visit as a significant diplomatic reset. And People magazine has run an exclusive about, it's very high stakes, that, the king considers this to be a very high stakes visit. The British media is running wall-to-wall coverage of two men who both enjoy pointing at things and standing next to each other at the White House. I don't know. I'm talking, there's no charisma, there's no riz, there's nothing for us to sink our teeth into. But again, that might develop. I thought maybe Steve Schmidt might give them a nice welcome. I do not know. But again, meanwhile, the traveling press corps who followed the king to Washington at considerable expense, they apparently want to spend their time asking the king, will he visit Harry and the grandchildren in Montecito? So I don't even know anymore. I don't know. I'm doing this because, even so there's me in London not giving AF, and there's the press who literally followed him all that way, and all they're interested in is going to be seeing Harry and the grandchildren. Now, they're also not talking about Ukraine, where Harry obviously went to walk through a minefield 6 days ago. They're not talking about the Jeffrey Epstein survivors who held a mock tea party. I thought that was inspired, and if I were them, I would get every major press to cover that. And also, we know that even Amnesty International has also said that the king shouldn't have gone on that visit. So even then they said that the visit would be a national humiliation for the king and for the people of Britain. And also we know that the BBC, they did an investigation into the operation that Jeffrey Epstein ran in London, where he rented several apartments and several flats for the women that he trafficked. So at the end of the day, the press is not interested in any of that. They're only interested in whether the king will go and see his ginger grandchildren. And the ballroom, I need to bring that in because, again, we saw what happened at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It didn't really generate that much sympathy around the world because Many feel, well, there was something about it. I'm not saying it was, but this is what people are saying. Some people are saying it was staged. I don't know. And we know that with the ballroom is an obsession that number 47 has. He wants to build a new ballroom at the White House. And he mentioned it enthusiastically, apparently, when the king visited Windsor last year. So I think, yeah, maybe they will talk about that during this visit. Who knows? Good luck to both of them. I think all involved, they're going to need it, because I'm sure the moment Camilla leaves them, she's going to have a stiff drink. And yeah, I can't begrudge her that. For a change, actually, I am with her on that. And we know that the King's visit right now is being sold to the rest of us in the UK as a moment of quiet British dignity that is providing a stabilizing counterpoint to American chaos. And remember what Tina Brown said about when she wrote the line that the worse the world gets, the better the king looks, because, well, the king looks calm and collected. I don't know. I'm just wittering. Anyway, the bottom line is there's a lot happening, and right now the state visit, I don't know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wait till tomorrow. I'm going to wait until the speech, because I love speeches, not long, boring speeches, but I love dissecting speeches. So hopefully when he gives that speech, is it today or tomorrow? Not that I care. I will be able to have something to talk about properly and dissect. So essentially, they've arrived. Number 47 didn't even send anybody that senior to go and meet them at the airport. So he Ubered them to the White House, and they had tea, and they looked at bees. So that's all I have to say about that. I wish I didn't have to do this report, because it's not my usual video. I like my videos to be of substance. I like them to be of value. I like them to be of quality. But I'm so sorry. That's all I have to report. But I do recognize that I have to say something about the visit, and here I am. So hopefully we'll have a bit more. Oh, and yes, there was a reception for the King and Queen at the British embassy or consulate or whatever. So yeah, that's about it really. But anyway, my name's Elizabeth. I'm the author of The Luxpreneur. And for more insights like these, please like, share, comment. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, please. And to support my work in holding truth to power. Sorry, I couldn't really do much of that in this video. Please buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Elizabeth Solaru, or you can get a copy of my book, The Luxpreneur, from Amazon, Waterstones, or Barnes & Noble.
The King in Washington, Diplomatic Theatre and Misplaced Priorities. Charles and Camilla arrived at Joint Base Andrews in the late afternoon, greeted by US Protocol Chief Monica Crowley, changed and proceeded to the White House for tea with Donald and Melania Trump. Charles kissed Melania on the cheek. The Trumps appeared pleased to see them. Camilla wore a pale pink Dior coat and carried a Cartier brooch from the royal collection, the Union Jack alongside the American flag, a piece given to the late Queen in 1957. Borrowed, like so much of this visit, from what the institution used to be, rather than built from what it currently is. The institutional machinery is working very hard to frame all of this as a significant diplomatic reset, with People magazine running an exclusive about how high stakes Charles considers it, and the British media producing wall-to-wall coverage of two men who both enjoy pointing at things standing next to each other in the White House. Meanwhile, the travelling British press corps who followed Charles to Washington at considerable expense apparently want to spend their time asking whether he will visit Harry and the grandchildren in Montecito. Not about Ukraine, where Harry was in a minefield 6 days ago. Not about the Epstein survivors who held a mock tea party with an empty chair reserved for Charles while he was having tea with Trump. Not about Amnesty International's description of the visit as a national humiliation. And not about the BBC's investigation establishing that Epstein ran a trafficking operation in London for years after the Metropolitan Police declined to investigate. Just whether Charles will pop over to see the ginger grandchildren. The King in Washington, while the press corps asks about Harry, Charles and Camilla touched down at Joint Base Andrews in the late afternoon, greeted by US Protocol Chief Monica Crowley, and made their way to the White House for tea with Donald and Melania Trump. Charles kissing Melania on the cheek, the Trumps appearing genuinely pleased, Camilla in a pale pink Dior coat, and a Cartier brooch from the Royal Collection featuring the Union Jack alongside the American flag, a piece that belonged to the late Queen and was given to her in 1957. The institutional machinery is working very hard to frame all of this as a significant diplomatic reset. People magazine has an exclusive about how high stakes Charles considers the visit, and the British media is running wall-to-wall coverage of two men who both enjoy pointing at things standing next to each other in the White House. Meanwhile, the travelling British press corps who followed Charles to Washington at considerable expense apparently want to spend their time asking whether Charles will visit Harry and the grandchildren in Montecito. The King is in Washington, and all the press corps want to talk about is Harry, Meghan, and the children. Meanwhile, the travelling British press corps, who have followed Charles to Washington at considerable expense, apparently want to spend their time asking whether Charles will visit Harry and the grandchildren in Montecito. Not about Ukraine, where Harry was in a minefield 6 days ago. Not about the Epstein survivors who held a mock tea party with an empty chair reserved for Charles while he was having tea with Trump. Not about the BBC's investigation establishing that Epstein ran a trafficking operation in London for years after the Metropolitan Police declined to investigate. Whether Charles will pop over to see the ginger grandchildren. The ginger grandchildren, it turns out, are the dominant narrative. Not the Budapest Memorandum, not the state of bilateral trade, not the ongoing dismantling of the post-war international order. The ginger grandchildren in Montecito, and whether a king on a state visit of supposed historic significance will find a window in his schedule to drive up the coast and hold an infant. The King in Washington, while the press asks about Montecito. And yet none of this appears to register with the travelling press corps. Harry was in a Ukrainian minefield 6 days ago. An actual minefield with actual mines. And the question being lobbed at palace representatives is whether Charles will make the drive to Montecito. The Epstein survivors, meanwhile, held a mock tea party with an empty chair, reserved specifically for Charles at the precise moment he was sitting down with the Trumps, and that chair will remain in those photographs long after the readouts from Monday's meeting have been forgotten. Amnesty International called the visit a national humiliation, not a diplomatic misstep, not an awkward optic, a national humiliation. These are not fringe concerns being raised by fringe organisations. They are serious, documented, and sitting directly in front of the press corps that flew to Washington at considerable expense. And the question is about Montecito. The King in Washington, while the press asks about Harry. The ballroom, for those who have not been following, is Trump's obsession with building a new ballroom at the White House. He mentioned it enthusiastically when Charles visited Windsor last year. There is a reasonable argument that it occupied more of Trump's mental bandwidth during Monday's tea than the special relationship, the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine, Iran, or the state of bilateral trade. Interior design ambitions, apparently, have a way of crowding out geopolitics. The special relationship that carefully tended diplomatic fiction took a back seat to square footage and chandeliers. The king in Washington borrowed dignity and empty chairs. The Charles visit is being sold as a moment of quiet British dignity, providing a stabilizing counterpoint to American chaos. Tina Brown's line about the worse the world gets, the better Charles looks, serving as the operating theory of the whole exercise. The problem with that theory is that it requires Charles's legitimacy to be genuinely independent of the institutional wreckage rather than simply more elegantly upholstered. The Duchy of Lancaster tried to sell toxic contaminated land near primary schools. Andrew is under criminal investigation. The Epstein files document a trafficking operation in London that the Metropolitan Police declined to investigate. Virginia Giuffre's family asked for 10 minutes, and the attorneys said no. The composure is real. The Dior is impeccable. The brooch is historically significant. But composure dressed in borrowed symbols is not the same thing as an institution that has actually reckoned with what it is. The appearance of stability and the reality of stability are not the same performance, and one of them requires rather more than a pale pink coat and a well-timed kiss on Melania Trump's cheek. The Crown's borrowed dignity and Washington's empty chairs. The institutional vulnerabilities are not difficult to find if you are prepared to look for them. The Duchy of Lancaster, that ancient and supposedly dignified arm of the Crown's private estate, attempted to sell contaminated land near primary schools to Wigan Council at market value, as though the proximity to children was simply a line item rather than a moral catastrophe. Prince Andrew remains under criminal investigation, the details of which have not dissolved simply because the palace stopped answering questions about them. And the Metropolitan Police, when presented with evidence that Jeffrey Epstein had been running a trafficking operation in London for years, declined to investigate it. These are not ancient scandals softened by time. They are current. They are documented. They are the institution as it actually exists, as opposed to the institution as it is being performed this week in Washington. The Crown borrows what it cannot build. Camilla's brooch, the Union Jack beside the American flag, a piece given to the late Queen in 1957, did not belong to this visit. It was borrowed, as brooches from dead queens tend to be, and as so much of the institutional scaffolding surrounding Charles's Washington trip is borrowed, from history, from precedent, from a version of Britain that existed before the duchy sold contaminated land, and the attorneys said no to Virginia Giuffre's family, and Andrew became a subject of criminal investigation. The visit does not build credibility so much as rent it, draping itself in the accumulated prestige of what the monarchy once was, in the hope that nobody looks too closely at what it currently is. And beneath the pale pink Dior and the carefully choreographed arrivals and the wall-to-wall coverage of two men who enjoy pointing at things, the empty chairs remain. Rita O's mock tea party chair, empty in every photograph. The questions about Ukraine and Epstein and Amnesty International's assessment of national humiliation, empty and unanswered in the briefing rooms. The institution performs continuity while the press corps asks about Montecito, and the brooch catches the light, and nobody mentions whose it was or why it had to be borrowed in the first place.